It all began almost by accident, as it so often does when fate deals a card no one expects. In her very first film, Lauren Bacall found herself swept into a storm that blurred the lines between cinema and reality. A tangled love triangle involving director Howard Hawks and her on-screen partner, Humphrey Bogart. Years later, when Hawks was asked what had truly happened back then, he didn't mince words. His reply was cold, almost rehearsed. The whole point of theater is that it shouldn't feel old, no matter how many times you play it. But what happened wasn't theater. It was heartbreakingly real. With the predatory allure of a femme fatale and a voice that seemed to rise from the smoke-filled haze of midnight jazz clubs, Bacall became an emblem of Hollywood's golden age. At first glance, her life might read like a checklist of triumphs, scandals, and red carpet moments. But behind that glittering facade lay something far more fragile and far more human. She knew what loss felt like from a young age. In the year 1932, her parents divorced, and her father vanished from her life as if erasing himself completely. That absence carved a deep wound in her, but it also forged an unbreakable bond with her mother. Two women clinging to each other in a vast, indifferent city. Still, the hurt remained. The chill that Bacall would later conceal behind her poised stare and clipped delivery first settled into her soul during those years. Not long after starting high school, she already knew exactly what she wanted: fame. But hers wasn't a hunger born of vanity alone. She lived for the stage. She devoured films. The theater stirred something electric in her. Her idol was Bette Davis, and it was through Davis that a new name entered her life. At the age of 13, sitting in the darkened hush of a movie theater during Marked Woman, Bacall saw Humphrey Bogart for the first time. She would later whisper to a friend, "I'm absolutely crazy about him. Just crazy." The road to stardom was uneven and often unglamorous. To make ends meet, she modeled for catalogs and handed out tickets at theaters. It wasn't glitter, it was grit. But one day, luck chose to knock. When she turned 18, her photograph landed on the cover of Harper's Bazaar. That moment would change everything. By pure chance, or perhaps destiny, the legendary socialite Slim Keith noticed the cover, grew curious about the girl, and showed the magazine to her husband, none other than Howard Hawks. He asked his secretary to call the young woman. But things didn't go quite as planned. Instead of a call, the secretary sent Bacall a plane ticket to Los Angeles. And just like that, Lauren arrived in Hollywood, raw, untrained, but lit by an undeniable inner fire. She confessed to Hawks that her acting experience was barely more than a few high school plays, a couple of shy roles. He didn't see weakness, he saw potential. "You haven't learned any bad habits yet," he told her. Her innocence, her honesty, even her fear, all of it became part of the persona that would later captivate millions. This is not just a story about a girl who became a star. It's a story about how loneliness can turn into strength, how a trembling voice can grow into the voice of an era, and how a dream, born in the shadows of a movie theater, can one day step into the light and never fade. It all began not with triumph, but with a tremble in her hands, in her voice, in her very soul. When a young Lauren Bacall stepped onto the set for her first screen test for Howard Hawks to have and have not, fear gripped her so tightly that her body refused to obey. To steady herself, she tilted her chin downward and looked up at the camera. That subtle gesture, born from insecurity, would become her signature. The smoldering gaze that didn't just captivate the lens but enchanted every man behind it. Hawks was instantly taken. She had none of the affectations he despised in other actresses. She was fresh, untouched clay he believed he could sculpt into the perfect star. He took her under his wing like an artist obsessed with a vision. For her, he rewrote the script, erasing a love triangle, cutting out rival female characters, and focusing every spotlight, every line, every camera angle on Lauren. For the leading man, he cast none other than Humphrey Bogart, the screen legend Bacall had adored in her youth. Every day on set became a private masterclass. Hawks wasn't just directing her, he was molding her, watching her closely, shaping her every move. But his interest went beyond the professional. His wife already knew it. He wasn't simply a mentor, he was a hunter, and Bacall seemed like his next prize. But Lauren Bacall wasn't made for submission. She had no intention of becoming someone's obedient protege or fleeting set romance. She knew that real connection wasn't born from control, it came from truth. And her spark ignited not for Hawks, but elsewhere. When her eyes met Bogart's, something inside her shifted. Not from fear, but from recognition. What flared between them wasn't just on-screen chemistry. It was something deeper, quieter, undeniable. He was married. She was a 19-year-old newcomer, he, a 44-year-old Hollywood veteran. But one day, after filming Wrapped, he walked up to her, kissed her gently, and asked for her phone number. She scribbled it on a matchbox. That small gesture marked the beginning of something impossible to hide. They tried to keep it a secret, but secrets never last long in Hollywood, especially with a jealous wife watching and a possessive director who believed women belonged to him. This story began with a tremble and became a whirlwind that changed everything. This is not just a story of fame. It's a story of pain, love, and the fierce determination to remain true to oneself in a world shaped by studio politics and oversized male egos. When Lauren Bacall first stepped onto the set of To Have and Have Not, she was an untested newcomer, bold on the surface yet deeply vulnerable. No one could have guessed that her on-screen debut would ignite not just a legend, but a battle for her very place in Hollywood. Director Howard Hawks, the very man who first spotted that spark in her, suddenly turned against her. Though he had signed her to a contract, his envy flared when Humphrey Bogart, the film's leading man, began focusing more and more on the young actress. Hawks didn't just rage, he threatened to end her career before it had even begun. In desperation, Bacall turned to Bogart. He was older, seasoned, a Hollywood icon, and he took her side. What followed was an escalating feud between the two men. Production halted for 2 full weeks. The quiet tension on set gave way to open conflict, eventually forcing studio head Jack Warner to step in. When To Have and Have Not finally premiered, it wasn't an overnight box office sensation. But critics and audiences agreed on one thing: a true star had arrived. Lauren Bacall, with her cool gaze, deep voice, and restrained strength, did more than make an impression. She hypnotized. Just 8 days after the premiere, Bogart announced he was leaving the home he shared with his wife. Hollywood held its breath. Was this the start of a new legendary romance? The studios certainly thought so. By fall of that same year, the pair reunited on the set of The Big Sleep. It seemed Bogart was ready to trade his old life for a future with Bacall. But fate, as always, proved more complicated. Only 11 days after the separation announcement, Bogart stunned everyone by saying he was returning to his wife. For Lauren, it was a heartbreak like no other. Shocking, painful, and deeply personal. Her youthful heart, full of hope, shattered into pieces. But Bogart's marriage had long been crumbling. Alcohol, bitter arguments, and emotional exhaustion boiled over during the holidays. It became clear it was over. He left for good. And this time he returned to Bacall. On May 10, 1945, Humphrey Bogart finalized his divorce. Just 11 days later, he married Lauren Bacall. The ceremony was small and quiet, held on a friend's farm in Ohio. Few believed the marriage would last. Bogart had already been married 3 times, and he was 25 years her senior. Everything seemed stacked against them except one thing: love. Becoming Bogart's wife instantly placed Bacall at the center of Hollywood's inner circle. It was she who coined the name that would go down in history, the Rat Pack. These weren't glamorous partygoers, but a raucous group of Bogart's friends, including Frank Sinatra. After one of their many drunken escapades, Bacall tried to scold them but ended up muttering in frustration, "You're nothing but a pack of rats." The name stuck. If the filming of To Have and Have Not had been fraught with tension, The Big Sleep was shaped by something else entirely. Bacall, Bogart, and even Hawks had learned to see each other differently. Now, behind every frame, there was not conflict, but a shared commitment to making something powerful, something deeply human. And so, through heartbreak, battles, and resilience, one of the most iconic couples of Hollywood's golden age was born. Behind the legend stood a woman, fragile yet unyielding, with a voice that didn't just whisper from the screen but echoed in the hearts of an entire generation. Time is like water. It has no shape, yet it holds everything. Light, sorrow, triumph, and fear. So it is with the story of Lauren Bacall. Her life wasn't just a parade of roles, posters, and photo shoots. It was a flowing current, where each moment was lived with courage, longing, and an unshakable belief in her own truth. Her first encounter with Humphrey Bogart sparked to life on the set of To Have and Have Not. It wasn't just chemistry, it was a collision of two fiercely independent spirits, two unforgettable voices forever etched into the black and white world of classic cinema. Then came The Big Sleep, a film that roared across the screen like lightning, a defining chapter of film noir. Bacall and Bogart. Together, they became magnetic. They starred in 4 films as a duo, and audiences couldn't look away. But behind the scenes, the story was different. In the early years of their marriage, Bacall worked rarely. She wasn't chasing spotlights or applause. She was devoted to him, to Bogart. Her love was quiet but unwavering. She turned down roles that didn't move her. Hollywood, a town that doesn't forgive defiance, whispered, difficult. In 1945, the Women's Press Club named her the least cooperative actress of the year. Warner Brothers suspended her 6 times for refusing to play the game. Yet in every no, Bacall remained fiercely loyal to herself. The few films she did make during that time are now considered cinematic milestones. By 1951, after years of clashes and quiet battles, the studio finally let her go. And only then did the world begin to see her, not as Bogart's wife, but as Lauren. Still, many directors continued to view her through the lens of his last name. Bogart had been married 3 times before, but he had never had children. For Bacall, motherhood wasn't a dream, it was a need. She hoped. She waited. When she couldn't conceive, Bogart began hormone treatments in an effort to help, and suddenly lost his hair. He showed up on set bald but hopeful. That hope was answered. In 1949, their son was born, Stephen Humphrey Bogart, named after the character that had brought them together. Soon after came their daughter, Leslie Howard. Their home became her quiet harbor. But every harbor knows storms. Bacall was a star, but she carried a truth she could not speak aloud. Her Jewish heritage, deep and personal, became invisible in the Hollywood of that era. To ease their children's path, Bogart urged her to baptize them. Bacall agreed, not out of weakness but out of love, out of the ache of not being able to claim her whole self in a world that wouldn't understand. Still, after parting ways with Warner, she bloomed. Anyone who thought her career was over was wrong. Her return to the screen after becoming a mother was a triumph. How to Marry a Millionaire, alongside Marilyn Monroe and Betty Grable, became a box office sensation. Audiences saw her again, and this time they listened. In the early 50s, the famed Grauman's Chinese Theater invited her to leave her handprints and footprints beside the legends. Bacall declined. She said she hadn't yet earned that place. It was modesty, honesty even with herself. While she was shaping a new chapter at Fox, Bogart was preparing to leave Warner behind and dreamed of producing his own films. By 1955, he was already planning his next project when pain began to take hold. His throat, eating, speaking, everything became a struggle. Bacall urged him, go to the doctor. She sensed the darkness gathering. But that is another story. A story of loss, of love, and of the enduring fire in a woman who didn't just act on screen. She lived as if every scene might be her last. When he finally gave in and agreed to be examined, the diagnosis hit like a sentence. Esophageal cancer. The house grew silent, tense, as if the walls themselves were bracing for the inevitable. In that cold shadow of illness, filming became Lauren Bacall's only escape. As Humphrey Bogart fought for his life, she was working on Designing Woman, a film that would later earn her praise from critics. But off-screen, the reality was far from glamorous. Doctors attempted the impossible. They removed his esophagus, 2 lymph nodes, even part of a rib. The surgery was brutal, the recovery worse, and not nearly enough. Chemotherapy followed. Grueling, punishing, merciless. The months of agony stripped Bogart of everything he once was. By the end, he could barely climb a flight of stairs. 1 year after the diagnosis, he fell into a coma, and the next morning, the world lost him forever. He was only 57 years old, and in his final days weighed less than 90 pounds. Lauren was shattered. She had spent a year by his side, holding on to hope, refusing to believe the worst. And now she was alone. A widow at 32, with 2 young children and no one left who had ever been her everything. Her anchor, her love, her whole world. Time seemed to collapse, freezing her inside it. But life, indifferent as ever, kept turning. And in the middle of that wreckage, someone stepped in who knew how to act fast. It was Frank Sinatra, Bogart's old friend. He invited her out to dinners, surrounded by familiar faces, places where she could forget, if only for an hour. She resisted at first, not ready to speak, terrified of silence but equally afraid of pretending. Gradually, their friendship deepened into something more. She knew she was playing a part, pretending to be alive again, but the spark between them was real. Still, the fairy tale was short-lived. After a few months, Sinatra proposed. But when news of the engagement leaked to the press, thanks to one of Bacall's friends, he cut her off immediately. He was furious, convinced she had tipped off the papers. He didn't wait for explanations. He simply vanished. After Bogart's death and the heartbreak with Sinatra, Lauren Bacall left Hollywood and returned to New York. She bought an apartment in the infamous Dakota Building. And there, she met actor Jason Robards, a Broadway star waiting for his second divorce to be finalized. Things moved quickly. They got engaged, but even getting married felt like an ordeal. They were rejected in Vienna, then in Las Vegas, as if the world itself was saying no. Eventually, they made it to Mexico and were married there 1 month later than planned. There was a reason for the rush. Lauren was pregnant. The birth of their son, Sam Robards, brought joy back into her life. In New York, on stage and among her own, she felt like herself again. She began planning a return to film, but happiness at home proved fragile. By 1968, the truth could no longer be ignored. Jason was drinking heavily, uncontrollably. And so Lauren, who had not been alone since she was 19, made one of the hardest choices of her life. She filed for divorce. 7 years of marriage came to an end. But it wasn't defeat. It was freedom. From that union, one thing remained: Sam. And for Lauren, that was enough. No regrets. In the restless heart of Broadway, where lives flicker by with each rise and fall of the curtain, she finally found what she had been searching for all along: a sense of purpose. The stage became more than a platform, it was her sanctuary. Fear gave way to voice, and the shadow of great personal loss transformed into strength. Beneath the glow of the footlights, she stood tall again, like a flower stretching toward the sun after a long drought. It was here, in the musical applause, that she stepped into a role once made iconic on screen by none other than Bette Davis. And in the year 1970, her performance earned her the Tony Award, along with something deeper and more lasting: Peace Within. But this was more than a triumph. It was a full-circle moment. As a young girl, Bette Davis had been her guiding light, the kind of legend who made your knees tremble with awe. Once, still just a teenager, she even tracked Davis to a New York hotel just for a fleeting glimpse of the woman she idolized. Years later, after taking on Davis's role in Applause, fate intervened again. Davis attended the performance, and, rather than slipping away quietly, made her way backstage. This time, the words of admiration came from Bette herself. Over the next decades, she remained true to her principles. She selected roles with the same care she had back in the golden years of the 1950s. Many believed her career would quietly fade, but fate had one more gift in store: a final, dazzling encore. In 1996, she appeared in The Mirror as Two Faces, a tender romantic comedy that earned her the first and only Academy Award nomination of her career. She had already won a Golden Globe, and it seemed inevitable that the Oscar would follow. But in a twist no one saw coming, the award went to Juliette Binoche. "I thought Lauren would win," She earned it, said a colleague. And still, years later, in 2010, just shy of her 90th birthday, the Academy would finally honor her with an honorary Oscar, a tribute to a woman who never chased recognition, but earned it anyway. She spent her final days in her beloved Manhattan home, surrounded by books, memories, and silence. She had always kept much of herself guarded, but in old age, she began to open the past gently, like a box of old letters too precious to read all at once. One of the deepest secrets she ever carried was rooted in her youth, when director Howard Hawks first saw her on set and tried to shape her into his ideal star. But she rejected his advances. When he discovered she was in love with Humphrey Bogart, he flew into a rage. Later, he would remark, Bogart fell in love with the character she played, so she had to keep playing her forever. After Bogart's death, her world seemed to lose its center. Years later, she would admit to waking up in tears, haunted by dreams in which he kept slipping away. He had not been just a husband, he was her breath, her stillness, her storm. And when it came time to say goodbye, she performed one final, intimate ritual. She placed a silver whistle on his casket. It was the same whistle he had once given her during the filming of To Have and Have Not, where her character famously said, "You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow." Engraved on the whistle were the words, "If you need me, just whistle." And in that single gesture, quiet, simple, and profoundly moving, the entirety of her past came rushing in. All of Hollywood, loud, cynical, and impossibly beautiful, seemed to gather in the space between memory and breath.